In this video, we're going to be discussing consumer surplus, which is a really interesting topic from economics. To understand consumer surplus, we need to start with the demand curve. The typical demand curve is a downsloping curve, such as the one that you see here. The demand curve represents the relationship between the price of a good or service and the quantity that is demanded for that. So as an example, if you have a price of a product that is very high, it's high up on the y-axis here, then the quantity demanded is going to be very low. So quantity demanded is on the horizontal axis and price is on the vertical axis. So if we go over from a price, we go down to get the quantity demanded, high price, low quantity demanded. On the other hand, if we go to a low price, we go over to the curve and then down, we have a high amount of that good or service that will be demanded at a low price. And that makes perfect sense. We don't buy things when they go up in price. We go and buy things, or more of them, when they are on sale at a lower price. So this is the basic demand curve, and we will be working with demand functions that are in the form of P equals some function of Q, and we're calling this D for demand. So P is a function of the quantity demanded. Next is willingness to spend. Without going into a lot of detail, it can be shown that the willingness of the public to spend on a good or service is the area below the demand curve and above the x-axis or the q-axis, if you will. So all of this shaded area below the demand curve is what we call the willingness of the public to spend on something. And so we know how to find that shaded area. It is simply the integral of the demand curve. And so that's what we have here. So the willingness to spend, W, is simply the integral from 0 to Q. Our upper bound will be the quantity that we're talking about, the quantity demanded of the demand function. So the integral from 0 to Q of the demand function integrated with respect to Q. So it's a simple integral. The actual expenditure is how much the public actually spends. Now, the willingness to spend was how much the public is willing to spend. But if the manufacturer sets a price that is lower, then the shaded area here below the price line, so this horizontal line would be the price line. The shaded area below that would be the actual expenditure. And we could create an integral for that. The actual expenditure is simply the integral, once again, from 0 to Q of the price. Now, the price is a constant. So this is simply the integral of a constant P with respect to Q. So we have two different integrals now. We have the integral for the willingness to spend, the integral for the actual amount the public has to spend, and consumer surplus is the difference between those two. Graphically, we have, so all of the area below this demand curve, all the way down to the Q axis, was the willingness to spend. This area here, which I will shade blue, this was the actual expenditure. And so the difference between those two, the green area, is consumer surplus. It's basically how much society or consumers as a whole are saving by purchasing a good or service at a reduced price, less than what they were willing to spend. And so this is simply the difference or the area between two curves. And so we know how to find the area between two curves. We did that in our last lessons. We have the willingness to spend minus the actual expenditure, and we can combine that into one little formula, and this is what we call our consumer surplus formula. that we will use right here. And it is nothing more than finding the area between two curves. And so we have the integral from 0 to q of the demand curve minus the price, all integrated with respect to q. All right, so let's do a couple of examples here. If a manufacturer has a demand curve given by d sub q equals 200 minus q, and the price is set at 20, what is the consumer surplus? Well, the first thing that we always need to do is find q. We're going to need to find q because q is going to be our upper bound. And so to do that, we're simply going to take our demand curve. Remember, the demand curve is also equal to P. P is equal to D sub Q, which is equal to 200 minus Q. So we can get rid of the D sub Q and just say P is equal to 200 minus Q. And so we have P is equal to, what was it, 20 is equal to 200 minus Q, so Q is equal to 180. So that then becomes our upper bound of integration from 0 to 180. Remember, the upper bound of integration in our formula is Q. And so we want the demand curve, 200 minus Q, minus the price, and the price was 20. And we are taking all of that and integrating it with respect to Q. Well, we can simplify that a little bit. So consumer surplus is the integral from 0 to 180 of 200 minus 20 is 180 minus Q, dQ. And so integrating that, we have 180 Q minus 1/2 Q squared evaluated from 0 to 180. And as always, we can simply put this into Desmos as a function. And it doesn't matter if you use Q in Desmos or if you use X. And so evaluating that from 0 to 180 in Desmos, you will end up with 16,200. The consumer surplus. That is the total amount of savings by consumers by purchasing a good or service at a lower price. That is called the consumer surplus or savings. Let's do one more. Given the demand equation and a price of $29, determine the quantity that will be demanded and the given price. So first, we know what the price is. So 29 is equal to 1,044 minus Q squared. And subtracting 1,044 to the other side, we're going to have, I believe it's 1,015. And that's negative equals, whoops, there's an 18 in there, equals negative 18Q squared, or Q squared is going to be equal to negative 1015 divided by negative 18. And when we take the square root of that, and these negatives will cancel out, so the square root of 1015 divided by 18 ends up being approximately 7.5. So our integral for consumer savings or surplus is equal to, the bounds are 0 to 7.5. And then we want our demand function, which is 1044 minus 18Q squared minus the price, 29 dQ. Cleaning that up a little bit, we have the integral from 0 to 7.5 of 1015 minus 18Q squared dQ, which becomes 1015Q minus 18Q cubed divided by 3 is minus 6Q cubed evaluated from 7 to 7.5. And when you evaluate that in Desmos, you will get the consumer surplus is approximately 72.75. So this is the savings, the consumer savings or surplus by purchasing a product, good or service at a lower price. All right, consumer surplus.